piling on the pressure for economic sovereignty, and don't let warmongers rewrite history. Coming up on the Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report. It's the 4th of September 2025. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by Citizens Party lead organiser, jack of all trades, Glen Isherwood.
Thank you,
Glen. In this week's show, we're going to give you a report on what Glen and I did in Canberra this week with Professor Andy Schmuller, and we call it Piling on the Pressure, because we're not going to stop. We are not going to stop until we break the power of these banks that's so horribly distorting our economy. And we're going to combat some of the worst propaganda I've ever seen, which Australians have had forced down their throats this week, especially yesterday, in relation to the celebration in China. What were they celebrating, Glenn?
The 80th anniversary of the victory over fascism in World War II, specifically Japan.
In other words, something we should have been at. Something that should mean as much to us as it does to the Chinese. But for some reason it doesn't. And we'll talk about that. All right. Remember, we don't just put out this information for information's sake. We put out information that can be used to change the political situation in Australia, and you can help. We need to get this video around. Last week's did really well, 16,000 views so far. Really well by our standards, but you know we need 160,000 views, right? We need 1.6 million views. But we'll keep at it, and the way you can help is like the show, share it as widely as you can. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe and ring that bell icon to be notified of future updates. Comment. I do try and respond to the comments. Last weekend I was able to respond to 30 comments, which is a lot at once for me. But please do that. We value your feedback. Donate. There's a donate button there. We're only funded by everyday people, and that's, you know, on one hand you can say that's a disadvantage. On the other hand, look at it from the standpoint of like guerrilla warfare, right? Asymmetrical warfare. You know, if we were Clive Palmer's party, all he has to do is drop dead of a heart attack and the party disappears like that. It's the mass of contributions that makes us powerful, and we get more than all the major parties combined, and you can be one, but we need as much as we can, so please help. Finally, membership. We're on a very impressive membership drive. We'll put a graph on the wall on the screen here to show you the growth in our membership since the federal election. Right? Look, and it wasn't because we weren't appealing before. It's just that we've never really gone on a membership drive before. We've kept our membership to the level required to be registered. That's all, right? Now we're serious, and look at people are jumping on board. You too need to be one of those people. We need you to become a member of the Citizens Party. We're going to get to 5,000 members and then 10,000 members, and we're going to keep going.
Yeah, and Robbie, on that membership, a very good announcement can be made this week that we have reached the threshold of membership in South Australia to register the party in South Australia.
Very good.
The lodging of all the paperwork and forms is going to take place in the coming weeks, but a minimum membership requirement there was 200. We've gone well above. That's the first state of all states and territories in Australia. We intend to register the party at a state level so we can have state contests, state candidates, and grow the numbers, more boots on the ground. So the next big milestone is New South Wales. We need 750 members minimum by October, which we got less than 1 month to get that secure. We're on the track, but if you haven't signed up as a member yet, or you haven't encouraged your friends, family, colleagues or others who talk about us to become a member, you can jump on the website and do that. And the good news is we've got a very streamlined new membership page, which makes everything a one-stop shop. You can do everything, the membership form, the payment, the details.
Just for the hell of it, if you're not a member, especially if you're in New South Wales, click that link. We'll put the link below. Just check out how good that sign-up page is, and then use it.
Yeah.
Now, while we're talking about internal party matters, Glenn, I hadn't planned to do this, but
Yes.
we may as well announce it. Last Saturday night was the annual general meeting of the Citizens Party. Now, at that, we'll put a photo on the screen there. At that annual general meeting, we said goodbye to the outgoing chairperson, Anne Lawler, who's been the chairperson for 15 years. And we call her, I'm not quite sure, it actually might be, she might be the longest serving chairperson we've had, actually, I think.
I think so.
She's now she's not leaving the party. She just has had to step down as chairperson. So you can see photos there with Anne. I was elected as the national chairman of the Citizens Party now, so I have another hat on. It's not the same as a promotion. It's just more work. But that's okay. I'm the national spokesman of the party anyway, so it's a good fit. And that means it's my job to oversee this new direction the party's taken to build a grassroots mass membership base. And then we had a branch, so we sort of launched the Cornwall branch of the Citizens Party at that meeting, and 200 people were packed into that room for that event, followed by a brilliant Lebanese dinner afterwards.
Yes.
Bassima Hawley is the leader of the Cornwall branch there, and she gave an excellent speech. So we'll put some photos there. You can have a look at that. So that was I tell you what, if the major parties pay closer attention to us and start seeing 200 people turn up to one branch meeting, because they don't get 200 people at their branch meetings. Let me tell you. Now I don't want to boast too much. That's not standard for us, but it's where we're going, right? That's the point.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get into it, because now we're going to talk about what we want to do. Piling on the pressure for economic sovereignty. And as I said, Glen and I were with Dr. Andy Schmulo in Canberra again this week, following up from our first round of meetings at the end of July when we went there first. Economic sovereignty. What do we mean by economic sovereignty? Look, a shorthand way of describing what we mean is having the government we elect in charge of the economic system. And right now that's not the case. We elect the government, but it's not in charge. In 1937, John Curtin, who went on to become the greatest Prime Minister Australia ever had, expressed it most succinctly. He said, if the government is not in charge of monetary policy, it cannot govern except in a secondary degree. In other words, someone else is in charge. And if someone else is in charge other than who you elect, then the people, sovereignty does not lie with the people of Australia, right? And this has nothing to do with the sovereign citizen phenomenon that we talked about last week.
Robbie, there's another interesting definition that came out of that period, was Franklin Roosevelt describing what in its essence is fascism, and that is control over the democratic process of the voters, the people, by any private corporate power.
Yep.
Which he described in the 30s. At the same time, John Curtin was saying if the government doesn't control finance and monetary policy, it doesn't govern except in a secondary degree. That is exactly the issue today when it comes to who is defining policy in this country. Is it corporations or is it the people we elect?
Exactly.
One of those is the definition of actual fascism.
So, the problem we have identified for a long time in Australian politics is, I hate to tell you, but our parliament bows to the banks. They have all the power and authority they will ever need over the banks, and they refuse to use it. There's a saying, policy is personnel. The personnel that occupy that building, despite all their powers, that dominate the numbers from the major parties, Labor, Liberal and National, they are permanently on their knees to the banks.
And Robbie, I would actually say one of the ways this shows up egregiously is just how foreign it is to think, for some of these politicians to even think that they have a place or a right to intervene on the bank's decisions.
They're private
that's out of
companies.
left field. How No, we can't.
We can't tell a private
Are you
company what to
suggesting
do.
we, the elected people, of Parliament, can have a say in this matter on bank branch closures? Like, it's foreign to them. We're coming in and we're saying, yeah, you actually can.
Well, remember that was expressed most recently by Jackie Lambie in relation to Bendigo Bank in Queenstown. So, as you know, we've been talking about Queenstown. It's the most egregious bank branch closure of this latest round by Bendigo Bank. The last bank on the whole west coast of Tasmania is going to be ripped out. And Jackie Lambie replied to the locals saying, we can't tell the banks what to do, right? And that's why we went to Canberra, because we wanted to show them, no, you not only can you must. Since we last spoke about this, we've got some more statistics about Bendigo Bank, because you're seeing the ads. Bendigo Bank wants to be the new big bank, right? I spoke last week about where the guy running it, Richard Fennell, comes from. He wasn't there in the 90s where Bendigo Bank built its reputation as the community bank and is stepping into the gap that the big four banks were leaving. So he came along in 2009. He came from PricewaterhouseCoopers and IBM. He bided his time. He took over retail banking in 2018. And since 2020, under him, Bendigo Bank has closed more last banks in town, which is particularly devastating. It's bad enough to close the second last bank. When you close the last bank in town and there's no bank left, then that is the town starts to wither and die on the vine. Bendigo has done that more times since 2020 than all the big four banks combined. But because the big four banks are sort of easier to hate, Bendigo, and they're more prominent, Bendigo Bank sort of was able to fly under the radar of that, right? And not get much attention. But because this guy, Richard...
Precisely because they had the sympathy and that image in the community of being a more community-focused bank, they were able to leverage that goodwill.
Well, I can tell you, every single community that the big four banks were leaving with, like closing the last bank on, every single one of them said, can Bendigo Bank come here? Not realising that Bendigo Bank was doing it worse, right?
And we encountered that with Cooper Pedy. We tried to...
Absolutely.
The town reached out to Bendigo saying, come and take over. And they said, well, unless you can guarantee X amount of millions of dollars of loans... $100 million of loans, we're not coming.
Yep. Now, but this last bank in town idea is, like I said, it's particularly devastating. It was raised in the Senate report as the most devastating thing that happens. Queenstown, it's not just last bank in town, it's the last bank of the whole west coast, as we've said. And so the question, following on from what we were just talking about, is why can't the government just say to Bendigo, no, you're not going to do it? Well, Andy Schmulo, who is, in many respects, he's a leading expert on these issues in the whole country. And he has the only doctorate in prudential banking regulation in Australia to boot, right? His presence in Parliament this week was very powerful, and he laid out the message to these politicians that these banks are not normal businesses, but they enjoy an enormous privilege courtesy of the taxpayer. Now, there's 4 points I want to make about this that come from Dr. Schmulo. First of all the banks enjoy the government's deposit guarantee. Now, there's a separate question about whether the government will ever follow through on that guarantee. But for now, the banks are understood to have a guarantee of their deposits up to $250,000, right? Oh, and that covers all banks. Because of that, when our banks borrow money from investors, whether domestic or overseas, those investors lend that money on the basis that they know that the liabilities of that bank are guaranteed by the government. And so that is a safe investment because of that government guarantee. And so they will take a lower interest rate for the loans they make, the short-term loans they make to the banks. The Reserve Bank has estimated that is worth $3.6 billion a year to the bottom line of the banks. And of course, the majority of that $3.6 billion is shared by the big four banks who dominate 80% of the banking system. That adds up to over the 20 years since, Andy likes to point out, the 2004, we had a bank closures inquiry and the banks promised they wouldn't do it anymore.
No more closures, promised.
They've done it. So in those 20 years, that is worth cumulatively over $72 billion. That's profit to their bottom line because they have that guarantee from the taxpayer. Second, on top of that, the RBA has what's called a discount window through which it lends to the banks. The RBA is owned by the Australian government, therefore the people of Australia. But the only businesses that get this get to borrow from the RBA are banks.
Yeah.
And it's at a cheaper rate than any other businesses could possibly borrow from. That's worth even more to the banks. On top of that, the big four, separate them out for the rest, the big four on the international stage are understood to be too big to fail. They, even without the deposit guarantee, international investors know that the big four, ANZ, Commonwealth, NAB and Westpac, will never be allowed to go bankrupt in Australia. So they even discount their interest rates when they lend to those banks even more on top of that, right?
Yeah.
This is real money for the banks that keeps adding up, right?
Credit rating agencies and etc.
All because of the Australian people. This is the privilege that we give them. And on top of that, Glenn, we still have what happened in COVID when the Reserve Bank just conjured up $188 billion to lend to the big four banks at first 0.25% interest and then quickly 0.1% interest. And they lent it to the banks so the banks could lend to small business, and they didn't. Instead, they either lent it out at commercial rates for housing, and that's why, even though Australia's population went down during COVID because a lot of the people who weren't permanent residents here left, the housing market went up because the banks poured so much of this money into lending for housing, and we had a rapid rise in house prices. And they were then able to pocket the difference between the 0.1% they'll pay in the Reserve Bank and the it would have been, this was before interest rates went up, so it would have been like 3.35% that they were charging for the mortgages, right?
Yep. Robbie, if this was a horse race, it would literally be there'd be 4 horses at the front, or maybe 5 with Bendigo, and the government shot all the other horses and it's picked who's going to win.
Absolutely.
So that's your banking system in Australia.
Now, politicians got this. We had a whole bunch of meetings. We want to play this tape from Senator Malcolm Roberts, though, because he was an example. He was one of the people that we met with Andy Schmulo. He literally, within an hour, raced into the chamber to comment on what he had just learned from these meetings. Play the tape.
The committee is considering the Pacific Banking Guarantee Bill 2025, and the question is that the bill stand as printed. Senator Roberts.
I have 2 further questions and then I'm done.
You have the call, Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. This banking guarantee for the Australian banks in the Pacific Islands creates a very significant precedent. Wollongong law professor Andy Schmulo, a very impressive person, made a submission to the 2024 RRAT inquiry into bank branch closures, and a very impressive submission it was. His submission cited Reserve Bank of Australia figures that indicate that our banks save $3.6 billion a year in funding costs thanks to the taxpayer-funded guarantee on bank deposits. A guarantee that was hiked up from $250,000 per account to $1 million per account during the global financial crisis. Do you know how many banks opted out of that guarantee at the time? None. Not one. They all embraced it. They all accepted it. The acceptance of that benefit creates a reciprocal obligation on our banks to give back to the community, social licence. The community that has and continues to save them $3.6 billion every year.
Ironically, Glenn, as you know, that comment by Senator Malcolm Roberts was in relation to the Pacific Banking Guarantee Bill, where this is the irony of ironies. While the government is letting the banks close branches all across Australia, it is passing a bill to guarantee that our banks will be forced to stay in Pacific Island countries and provide banking services to them. And why is it doing that? Because when I think it was Commonwealth Bank was going to pull out of Nauru, And then the people of Nauru were like, oh, we need a bank. The Bank of China said, oh, we'll set up a bank for you. Can't have that, right? And so just because of the fear that the Bank of China will set up branches in all these islands, right, we're passing a specific banking guarantee, which makes me think that maybe one way we could solve the problem in Australia is if we could invite the Bank of China in to set up branches across Australia, and maybe the banks will get the message and decide, okay, we better not leave. How would that go down?
It's a sad state of affairs when, you know, all rules go out the window when geopolitics comes into play, Robbie.
Exactly.
But the point Andy, Dr. Schmuller was making in the meetings was, look at those figures and that data. The government is already subsidising the banks here. The government is already bending over backwards to give them all these special privileges. And what do they give back for that?
Now, outside of the banks that are members of the Banking Association, there's a group called the customer-owned banks, and those are the former building societies and credit unions that are now just called banks, right? And they're small. Some of them have multiple branches, but only, you know, up to half a dozen or something. But they have just formed a regional banking alliance, and they've said, look, we want to be the banks that step into the gap. And you know what? Now, one of the recommendations of the Senate inquiry was that the government should look at a levy that the banks that pull out of towns should pay. The big banks that pull out of town should pay a levy for doing so that can subsidise smaller banks to fill the gap. And I've been talking to these people, and they've told me if that was there, they'd be in. Like a bank, one of these small banks would rush into Queenstown to set up a bank to fill the gap for them if that levy was there. And think about what the levy would actually be, based on what you just said. It wouldn't be some onerous imposition of the bank. It would just be saying, take away some of that taxpayer subsidy the banks already enjoy from everything we just went through and divert it to these small guys who actually want to provide a service. What is unreasonable about that? Right? Because we know the ultimate solution, Glen, is the postal bank. I want to talk about that in a minute. But that's going to take a while to set up. This could happen now if they could just flick their fingers and do it. The problem is, only one of the, you know, we talked about Parliament. There's a tiny handful of people in Parliament who don't want to be on their knees to the banks. And so, you know, they're advocating for an intervention against Bendigo Bank, but they're not getting very far very fast. One of them is Colin Boyce. Colin Boyce is a member for Flynn. He spoke up immediately when this happened back in July because his town was one of the ones losing its agency of Taroom, which is we heard the description. It's the most profitable Bendigo Bank agency around, right? And they're still closing it. Something like $20 million of loans just out of this one agency that's connected to a pharmacy in the town of Taroom. He warned Bendigo Bank. He said to us that, hey, you're going to lose customers here because the next Bendigo Bank is in Mundubbera. But that's 3.5 hours away. On the way, there's Chinchilla and Roma, which are 2 hours away, but they don't have Bendigo banks. But the people in Taroom are not mugs. They're not going to go to they're not going to go 3.5 hours just to stick with Bendigo Bank. If they're forced to lose their banking service, they'll go to where the closest banks are and they'll move their accounts. And he warned them that. And these Bendigo Bank executives hadn't thought of that. They just assumed, oh, these people will stick with us. Why? Why would they stick with you? You're showing no loyalty to them, right? Even it's not a profitable agency, a super profitable agency. I mean, that's how despicable the mentality of these banking executives actually is. So Colin, for a month, has been trying to get a question up to the government about Bendigo Bank. I helped to draft the question. He ran into two problems. First, his own party, the Nationals, are out there trying to claim credit that they are, you know, they want to stick up for regional Australia and they're criticising these bank branch closures, etc. But it's just words. There's no actual action to back it up. There's no urgency behind them because it took him ages to approve. He can't just in Parliament in question time, you can't just get up willy-nilly. Your party has to approve the question you're going to ask, etc. It took him ages to get approval for a question.
Yeah, you got to queue up. You got to, everyone's got their questions.
And then
Yeah.
once you get approved, you get put on a list, and the list is in front of the Speaker. And the priority questions on the list are decided by the leadership of the party. So his is put down the bottom in miscellaneous, right? And the other problem he's ran into is Anthony Albanese has decided, along with a lot of other changes he made to Parliament, that he's going to shorten question time. It used to be at about an hour and a half, and now it's barely an hour and 10 minutes. Anyway, so he's been trying. He's been on the list for 2 weeks. He's been trying to get called to ask the question for 2 weeks. And people who are concerned about this issue should really admire this guy, because he's sticking with it, right? He wants action. And if you're in Flynn, your Member of Parliament's doing a great job for you. But he's also doing this on behalf of all these bank victims around Australia. Anyway, I want to play this quick video because it boiled over yesterday. Anthony Albanese gets up to close question time, and Colin couldn't help himself. And he's saying, one more question. And the Labor side sort of laugh at him. They weren't laughing out of ridicule. It's sort of good-natured laughing, but it got their attention. I'll just play the tape. But this is the lengths he went to try and get his question up.
For the Prime Minister.
Everybody's scared of you.
Order. Prime Minister has the call.
Gonna go in the first dozen.
The,
Gonna go in the first
the
dozen.
member for Flynn will just cool his heels.
I say to the member for Flynn, see if he can get in the first 24, and we'll tomorrow, and we'll give you a crack. But on that basis, I ask that further questions be patiently noticed.
Anyway, so Anthony Albanese has pledged if he's on the list in the first 24, he'll get the question today. So
It's not going to look good for the Liberal Nationals if they don't put Colin up the front
They
of the
better.
queue today, because that will
Exactly.
just seal it in the minds of everyone that this party absolutely has no interest in
100%.
responding to the crisis in Queenstown or all these other places losing their last branch.
Watch the Citizens Party on social media, because we're recording in the morning, right? In fact,
We'll know this afternoon.
sorry, our editor can put a little note up
Yep.
for the main show. You'll know, we don't know yet, but you'll know based on what's on the screen here whether the question got up or not. And if it didn't, do not blame Anthony Albanese, blame the Liberals and Nationals who are otherwise running around there and try and claim credit because they care about bank branch closures, right? Excellent point, Glenn. Now, that said, they are trying to do some things. They're just moving at a glacial pace. We'll put this on the screen. Senator Bridget McKenzie will move a motion for order of production of documents to demand the thing that we first called for months ago. The government must respond to the Senate inquiry. That's the reason this is all happening, because as a Senate inquiry is an excellent inquiry. It's been 15 months now and the government hasn't responded. So hopefully a motion will pass Parliament today demanding that. And even then, let's just move on to our solution, Postal Bank, because I want to play another video because this is brilliant. We know the Postal Bank is the solution. And I went to Queenstown. If you haven't seen it, you can go back a few episodes and see the video of that. I took video of the Bendigo Bank. In fact, Ben can put this on the screen. So you see the video of the Bendigo Bank branch, and then I pan the camera around, and literally across the street is this wonderful post office, right? And it's massive. The Bendigo Bank branch is a tiny little shop front. This is a massive building. They only use 1/4 of it. Now, we're not the only ones who figured out that post offices would make good banks, because the television show Bay of Fires on ABC, which is a very popular ABC drama, and it's starring Marta Dusseldorf, that is shot in and around Queenstown and those towns on the west coast of Tasmania. So the main town is not Queenstown, but that you see in the show. But then whenever they do action, and one of the subplots of the show is Marta Dusseldorf, the lead character, has to run a money laundering operation, and that involves sending her minions out to withdraw cash from banks that's below the $10,000 reportable threshold, right? So the irony is they're shooting this show, which requires using a lot of different banks, in a place of the world where there's only one bank for the whole West Coast. So what they've had to do is turn other buildings into banks for the show. Guess which buildings have turned into banks? The post offices. And so we'll just play this clip. Which is
not actually unusual, Robbie,
Of
because
course.
the post offices were where the banks were to begin with over a century
That's
ago.
where the Commonwealth Bank started.
A lot of Australian states had postal banks. That's where the Commonwealth Bank began. So it makes a lot of sense. You know, what doesn't make sense is the fact that we don't have one.
Well, run this clip. So this is from Bay of Fires, and just to set it up. So two of the conspirators, they're lining up. They've asked for their money at the bank, and then you'll see the teller goes to check, and they get nervous and they run out. Now, in that scene where they're in the bank, that is the Queenstown Post Office as it is now, right there. And when they run out, you'll see them take off, and you'll see the Bendigo Bank building in the background. Play it.
$9,550 in 50s, please. It's for a
Mower.
riddled mower,
Ride-on mower.
ride-on mower. You know the ones you ride on? I'm going to buy one of them.
Mr. Galeazzo,
Yeah,
would you mind waiting? The manager's gonna need a word.
yeah, no worries. By all means.
Nah, they're on to us, mate.
Yeah?
On to get.
Now, Dale Webster, the independent journalist who's done more to document this than anybody, she's actually started sort of she's offered a prize to all the fans of Bay of Fires, that whoever can spot the most Bendigo Bank branch images in the season. All right. So anyway, enjoy the show. But look, it just illustrates our point. We need a postal bank. That's a win-win solution for all of this. There's a blizzard of post offices closing especially in New South Wales at the moment. Licensed post offices who are sick of running businesses that are losing money because Australia Post is running them into the ground. They're handing back their licenses, right? And every town where this happens, they lose a post office, not just a bank, right? And none of it's necessary. A postal bank will save post offices and banking services.
Yeah. And it bears repeating, Robbie, we've mentioned it a lot. Why does a postal bank stop closures? Because that's proven to happen.
Yep.
The case in New Zealand when Kiwi Bank was opened in 2002, the major banks, which are all our big four banks, you know, who own the New Zealand banks,
Yep.
they put a freeze on closures across the entire country for 7 years.
Yep.
They didn't dare close a branch because they knew that they had new competition, and that new competition was going to bring take their customers away, so they had to be on best behaviour.
An ANZ director told me that when Kiwi Bank started, they were just flabbergasted how many people ran in there to set up accounts. And they had assumed that wouldn't happen, but it did. All right, just for the sake of time, we better move on. Don't let the warmongers rewrite history. Now, I'll try and keep a lid on this, because this has been infuriating this week. I want to start. We're going to talk about the Australian government and media's response to China's victory parade. Now, I want to start with playing this question that was asked in Parliament yesterday by Angus Taylor to the Prime Minister. Just run the tape.
Prime Minister, today, to Australia's shame, Daniel Andrews attended a Chinese Communist Party military parade alongside dictators Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un and the Iranian president. Former Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk described Mr Andrews' attendance as a bridge too far. Will the Prime Minister echo her condemnation? Did the Prime Minister or his office provide any personal or consular assistance for the visit?
Now, what you're seeing there, Glen, from Angus Taylor, is it's all the prejudice that we were brought up with from the Cold War. Oh, the commies. So he emphasises the Chinese Communist Party's parade. But as you said at the start of the show, what is this? This is the victory celebration over Japanese fascism that didn't just kill so many people in China, it threatened us. The only time our country has ever come under threat was from this Imperial Japan, right? Now, just look at the parade itself. There was one, the Chinese do this every 10 years. So there was a 70th anniversary parade in 2015. There was a 60th one in 2005, right? At the 70th one, I haven't yet, I was going to do some work to see who attended from Australia, the 60th one. But at the 70th one, we were officially represented by the Veterans Affairs Minister, which is actually a good person to represent us at these things. I personally would have preferred the Prime Minister of the day to represent us. I think it was Tony Abbott at the time, but he sent the Veterans Affairs Minister, right, to represent us. Nevertheless, Malcolm Turnbull, so I'm just trying to, I think Turnbull rolled Abbott in 2016. There's been so many of them. But anyway, Malcolm Turnbull gave a speech when he was Prime Minister, which, remember, he doesn't write these speeches. They're written for him. This was Australia's official... But we acknowledged that without the Chinese role in World War II, it would have been much harder for us to defeat the Japanese. This history that we grew up with, where the great United States came in and kicked butt and won the war, not to undercut what the United States did, good on it, but the US lost 400,000 people fighting the Germans and the Japanese. Australia lost 40,000 people fighting the Germans and the Japanese. China suffered 35 million dead and wounded fighting the Japanese, and the Soviet Union suffered 27 million killed fighting the Germans. Now and they were what? They were communists. Now, people will say, well, they can't deny the Soviet Union was communist, right? But there's a debate. Oh no, it wasn't the communists in China, it was the nationalists. Absolute rubbish. And I'm going to give you some information on that in a second. But let me make the point. Since the 2015 parade, when we had an official representative over there, right, Michael Rowland, the Veteran Affairs Minister, nothing has changed, actually. Nothing's changed for China, nothing's changed for us. The only thing that's changed is America decided to change its policy. That was the year America stopped identifying ISIS terrorism as the number one security threat to America, and instead said Russia and China were the number one security threat. They went from identifying these bloodthirsty, head-chopping terrorists as their number one threat to massively insulting the Russians and the Chinese, saying, no, you're now our threat. And everything became geared towards provoking a conflict with those two countries, right? That's what happened starting in 2015. That's why we're not there, because we don't run our own foreign policy in this country. We're subservient to the United States. But what people in the media, what Australians would have seen, those of you who are watching this, was the obsession with Dan Andrews. I was going to call this segment, I chickened out. I was going to call this segment, Who Stands with Dan Andrews? Because remember during COVID, I stand with Dan.
Oh boy!
Look, I don't particularly like the guy either. Why are the media doing this? This is pure. They're doing it because he is such a hated figure in Australia. So they're not highlighting Bob Carr as much. Dan Andrews, right? They're doing it now. Dan Andrews, when he was the premier, had a positive relationship with China, as did most other governments. In fact, all governments in Australia did. All of them did. In 2019, what you don't remember, Dan Andrews signed a Belt and Road deal with the Chinese.
Which is a memorandum of understanding.
Yeah, no, there was no obligation on either side, just memorandum of understanding. Yeah, we want to be part of this. So did the federal government under Scott Morrison. But they kept their secret.
The federal government approved it.
Exactly.
And people also miss the point that the sale of the ports in Darwin was under a Liberal government as well, and was vetted by every security agency in Australia and given the all clear by every security agency in Australia and the federal government at the time of the sale. But of course, things change.
So they're making it, exactly. So in this case, they're making about Dan Andrews to rile people up, right? Don't fall for that. Right? Whatever you feel about Dan Andrews, this is the media doing it. China's just happy to work with whoever's prepared to be a representative of Australia. Now, he wasn't there alone. He was over there with another Australian. There was Bob Carr, the former foreign minister, right? More high-ranking than Dan. I want to show a couple of clips that Bob Carr shared on Twitter. Here's he with Helen Clark. Helen Clark is, in international terms now, is actually even more high-ranking than Bob Carr, because she now has a sort of a global ambassador role on a bunch of things, right? She's not afraid to be there. But this next one's even more significant. This is Bob Carr with the former Prime Minister of Japan. So if the former Prime Minister of Japan can attend a victory parade about victory over Japan, and for which he might incur some stick back home. Why are we carrying on about us having representatives over there for this parade? And I'll just back up this reference to stick back home, because we did an article in the Alert Service this week about this. The Japanese ambassador to Australia, Glen, who was ambassador for 2 years until 2024, Yimigo Shumi, I think his name is, put up this tweet where he took exception to a BBC report about the anniversary, which just in passing referred to Japanese atrocities. Zoom in, Mr. Editor, on his repeat of the word atrocities, question mark. In public, he is denying Japan's war crimes. And I want to highlight this because this is a big problem in the Japanese government. It is full of people who deny Japan's war crimes. In our article, we document one of the worst of those war crimes, apart from the rape of Nanjing, was the Unit 731 in Korea, which did human experiments on the Koreans. Put up this photo of the now assassinated Japanese Prime Minister Abe, who wasn't assassinated by the Chinese, by the way. He got assassinated because he got into this cult, the Mooney cult, right? And some unhappy victim of the Mooney cult assassinated him. But look at what he's doing here as the Prime Minister of Japan, opposing in this jet fighter. Look at the number under him. Unit 731. That is a reference to this thing that the Chinese hate about that history more than anything else, because they were the victims of this horrible, Nazi-style just brutalization thing that the Japanese ran in World War II. And there's this side of Japanese politics. These are our allies, remember. They deny what they did in World War II. And that's why, that Japanese Prime Minister, if he does cop stick back in Japan for being at this thing, it'll be from those people, from utter bastards. People we should consider utter bastards because of what they deny what they did to us. We now have a federal electorate, a new one called Bullwinkle. And I just remembered this yesterday because I was so furious at Angus Taylor's question. After him, the member for Bullwinkle gets up and asks a question. Who's it named after? Vivian Bullwinkle, the sole survivor of that group of nurses who the Japanese forced to walk into the ocean and machine gunned them to death. Just nurses. There was one survivor, Vivian Bullwinkle, who came back to Australia and became the head of the Fairfield Infectious Diseases Hospital, right? These are real things that happen to us. So the people in Japan who want to deny this stuff, that's what they're denying. Why are we their friends and are so despicably full of hatred to the Chinese who were our allies? This is what Australians have to take a long, hard look at themselves about. Now, in case you're not mad enough, I'm going to play 2 clips from the 7:30 report because I want to take specific exception to what Sarah Ferguson did to Bob Carr in the 7:30 report. Just play the first one.
When the Consul General in Sydney invited me, I think it must have been back in April, it was to a commemoration and with a sense of what Chinese history values, an invasion that started in Manchuria in 1931, the rape of Nanjing, which was the opening atrocity of World War II, 1937-38, I didn't hesitate for a second because this Chinese story was a great part of the story of the victory of the Allies of 1945, 1944, 1945, and one of the great narratives of World War II with direct implications for Australia. The historian John Hurst said that because there were 1 million Japanese troops tied down fighting a Chinese resistance, that fighting the Chinese resistance, the Japanese Navy did not win its argument to be able to invade Australia. The army said, we cannot spare the divisions.
Well, there's no question that that was a significant event, and I think it's fair that we should point out to viewers that, of course, as you know, it was the nationalist forces of Shanghai Shek, the Kuomintang, who defeated the Japanese, not the guerrilla forces of the Chinese Communist Party.
I mentioned a moment ago that I was at a series of meetings with ambassadors of European countries here in Beijing. That was immensely valuable, and with people travelling with the Southeast Asian delegations. Good luck to the Chinese with their military parade. It's not what drew me here, and I didn't linger on it. I think I saw a bit on the TV screens as I exited those meetings I was at.
What do you mean by good luck to the Chinese with their military parade?
It's a jovial comment. I wouldn't put it on the top of your list of indictments.
Now, so what you see there is Bob Carr has acknowledged the incredibly important role China played in World War II, absorbing the most of Japan's military effort, which allowed, when my grandfather was on the Kokoda track in Papua New Guinea as just a young farmer, he and his comrades bravely fought the Japanese back. But one of the reasons they were able to do it is they weren't fighting the full might of the Japanese. The full might was bogged down in China, thanks to the Chinese resistance. And then she goes, no, that wasn't the communists, that was the Kuomintang, the nationalists. Oh, really, Sarah Ferguson, you ignoramus, you despicably prejudiced ignoramus. Let me read you excerpts from United States military reports back to America in World War II. In 1941, in a message to US Secretary of War Henry Stimson, US General Joseph W. Stilwell, Roosevelt's media liaison with Chiang Kai-shek and commander of the American forces in the China-Burma-India theatre, wrote that Chiang Kai-shek, the head of the Kuomintang, the nationalists that she said are the ones that deserve the credit, he wrote that Chiang intended to use US military aid to strengthen his domestic position rather than for the war against Japan. And I'm reading these excerpts from an excellent article written by our former researcher Melissa Harrison, The Roots of the Taiwan Conflict, which we published in the Australian Alert on 2nd of November 2022. And I go on. The US Office of Strategic Services, OSS, which was the forerunner to the CIA, estimated that during World War II, Chiang directed the bulk of his military efforts against the Chinese communists rather than at the Japanese. Then General Stilwell, who also served as Joint Chief of Staff to Chiang, was highly critical of Chiang's refusal to go on the offensive against Japan and his failure to dismiss corrupt or incompetent generals. Chiang reportedly refused to listen to anything except favourable reports. And then this is the big one, because I want to play a clip from this. There was a Marine Captain, Evans F. Carlson, who was a former intelligence officer in China, who became like a special forces guy. At the end of 1937, Carlson returned to China. He met American journalist Edgar Snow, soon to be author of Red Star Over China. Snow's glowing description of his experience in communist regions motivated Carlson to see for himself. He travelled as a military observer with the Communist Party of China's 8th Route Army, which was renamed the People's Liberation Army in 1947, and reported to Roosevelt that it showed the best training and highest morale of any army he had ever seen. Now, this guy was such a legend, Evans Carlson, that Hollywood made a movie about him in 1943 called Gung Ho. Now, it turned out, it had never occurred to me that term gung ho, which would have entered into our lexicon because of this movie in 1943, is a Chinese term. So when we say going gung ho, it never occurred to me until this week. Oh, that's China. It means working in harmony or working together. I watched the movie. You can watch it on YouTube. In fact, I recommend you do. We'll put a link below where you can watch it. It's not that long, but I want to run this little clip from it, where this guy who's talking is the character based on Evans Carlson. And this is what the Americans were prepared to acknowledge during the war. This wasn't a secret. They knew that the real resistance to the Japanese was being put up by the communists, and they also knew, we played that clip last week or the week before, that it was the communists in the regions that had the support of the people, not these corrupt nationalists that were just trying to take this American money. So you sort of a bit like Zelensky. Anyway, play this clip from Gung Ho.
Where did you go, Colonel? I joined the Chinese army. Are you kidding, sir?
And not even the Chinese Marines.
What for?
Well, I could see this war with Japan coming. You didn't have to look far for that. I realized that our first line of defense would be China. So I decided to find out just what her war potential was, just how long she could hold out. I joined the Chinese 8th Route Army. Remember that march they made during the Civil War, 6,000 miles clear across the country?
Was they Chinese in the Civil War? I thought there was General Sherman marching along the... Oh, forgive me, sir. I wasn't trying to make no crack, honest. It's just that I don't read the papers past the funny page. Will you excuse me, sir?
Never mind transport. Anyway, that's all over. All the Chinese are united now against the Japs. I've been hearing marvelous things about the guerrilla tactics of the 8th Army. This is right after Shanghai. I made up my mind to find out about them. I couldn't go in uniform, so I went without.
Plenty of fighting, huh, sir?
Transport, you never saw anything like it. Just look at those half-armed, ill-fed peasants. They outmarched, outfought, outmaneuvered the Japs at every turn because they believed in what they were fighting for. Because every man had only one desire, to do his duty. Well, I learned a lot of things that are not in textbooks, and I came back to the States to tell about them.
None of that has ever been highlighted in my lifetime, Glenn, because of the Cold War. When the Cold War came along, straight after World War II, they had to cover all that up, right? They wanted people to see the word communist as a trigger word, be terror. This is not us being pro-communist. This is us being pro-truth. The Citizens Party is not communist. We're not afraid of the communists. We're not afraid of the Communist Party of China. This is about being pro-truth. If our view of ourselves, if our system of alliances depends on us suppressing fundamental truths like who deserves the credit, to share the credit for the victory over something we all acknowledge was evil, the evil of fascism, the evil of Hitler, the evil of the Japanese. If we have to suppress that in order for our systems to work, that tells you something about the moral legitimacy of our systems. Would you agree?
Well, Robbie, I think, you don't have to like history. You don't have to like what happened. You don't have to, you can have your ideologies and everything, but you can't change history or whitewash it or alter it, for your geopolitical needs or ends. That's Orwellian. We all, despise the Orwellian rewriting history, and that is in effect, it was the communists that were at that time effectively fighting alongside the United States forces, Australian forces against Imperial Japan. And later, in the Vietnam War, General Giap, used communism as a means to achieve sovereignty for Vietnam. And, US generals and scholars studied this, that it was a means to an end for them. But, a lot of people in the West want to dismiss that as, that's inferior, or that's just propaganda. That's China trying to rewrite its modern day image and exercise propaganda and influence on the West. But it's history. It happened.
And I had a fight on Twitter with the Financial Review journalist Andrew Tillett, because he wrote an article where he said this military parade is China trying to redefine itself as an ally in the victory over fascism. And I went right after him. I said, redefine itself. We're the ones that have redefined ourselves. China never changed, right? This was always its core foundation. Now,
it's like that debate we have about changing the names of things because of some person in history who was a slave owner or a bad person, so we have to go and change the labels on streets and stuff. And
so Glenn, just to make the point though, that how well known this was once upon a time. You had an experience this week when we were in China. So you went to there was a Chinese embassy event that showed how Australians understood at the time who they were on the side of.
Yeah, so there was an invitation put out of a screening of a movie on the Dalfram dispute. And it was actually, the title of the movie is Pig Iron Bob, the Dalfram dispute. I believe it was produced in 2013. So the Chinese embassy was hosting a screening of this Australian-made movie What it covers is the Port Kembla workers who refused to load pig iron onto the Dalfram, this ship that was in harbour for months and months and months in 1937, destined for Japan, because we had a trade deal with Japan. Australia was, at that time, Japan was our second largest trading partner. And the contracts were there for BHP to load these ships and send pig iron over there to Japan. But word had reached Australia of the massacre of Nanjing, the massive war atrocities and invasion of China that had taken place.
400,000 people in the city, of which up to 300,000 were massacred in 6 weeks.
6 weeks, yeah. And this documentary goes through the accounts of the people, and it is just horrifying. But word had reached the whole world about this, and including the workers on the wharf at Port Kembla, one of which was a member of the Communist Party, but
those damn commies.
Pretty much all the rest were not. But they had a discussion. They said, do we want to load pig iron onto a ship that will come back to us as bombs? Because they believed the aspirations of Japan didn't stop at China.
Yep.
We were arming the enemy.
John Curtin was warning about that.
And also Essington Lewis was concerned as well as head of BHP. But the contract must be fulfilled. And Menzies was saying, you know, trying to break this strike. But every single day these workers would show up at the port, and they would say, you must load the Dalfram, and they would walk off the port. And for 3 months, around 3 months, they went without pay, without any means to support themselves, all on this, you know, refusal on moral grounds to be aiding or abetting, you know, the enemy or being party to war crimes. You know, this was 1937. It was only 4 years after the Great Depression. So a very, very incredibly tough period. But, you know, the point of playing this documentary and the Chinese embassy hosting a screening of it was to show that this is a very important chapter in solidarity that the Australian worker had with, you know, people in China who were suffering this incredible nightmare. And I think, I mean, what I was incredibly impressed by was just the fact that this was one of the first times in the world that you had a organised labour movement who had, on a moral principle, on a global level, you know, put a line in the sand, and Menzies couldn't break it. Well, eventually they did load the Dalfram, but it was under incredible duress. I mean, months and months later. But by then, across the whole world, this had captured the attention of everyone, and that's where, in the protest outside the town hall, where Menzies did go to the town, a lady yells out "Pig Iron Bob," and that name stuck forever. So it's just an example of what we can take away today, that everyone can stand up to this stuff and should be.
Yep, and it's all our history. Don't deny it. Don't let people rewrite it. And when you see someone like Angus Taylor getting up and asking a question like this, understand that he's not representing an Australian point of view. What he's actually representing is a point of view that all of our major party politicians have bought into in just in the last 10 years of sucking up to the United States and being prepared to deny these fundamental truths about the world. And by the way, motivated by the fact that just before the parade, there was the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation event in China. Go look at the list of countries that turned up for that. We have situated ourselves as a country with the minority of the world that are sticking with private banks running riot, economic systems based on looting other countries, etc. We have massive protests on the streets because our economies are so dysfunctional, right? And we're sticking with those systems that did that and the rest. Why is the rest of the world wanting to work with China like it is from all continents? Because their economic system is successful, and we have to be made afraid of that, so we don't ask, well, what could we adopt from their economic system? Well, what we could adopt is what their economic system adopted from us originally, public banks, and starting with a postal bank. Anyway, Glenn, run out of time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robbie.
Did well. You flew in last night, so good on you for showing up. Thank you to the viewer for tuning in. Remember, sign up to a membership and tune in next week for more of the Citizens Report.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.